In 1964, scientists in a Mexican lab cut out a chunk of a salamander's brain. Then they watched it grow back, every cell type restored, with no scarring and no deficits. The animal is called an axolotl, and it doesn't just regrow brain tissue. It regrows entire limbs, sections of its heart, and parts of its spinal cord. Its genome is 10 times the size of yours. And the wild population that gave us this biological cheat code is now down to a few hundred animals in one polluted lake outside Mexico City. So how does it do it? And can we steal the trick? To make sense of why this animal is so strange, you have to start with what the axolotl refuses to do. Most salamanders are born in water, swim around as gilled juveniles for a few months, then go through metamorphosis. They lose their gills, grow lungs, climb onto land, and finish out their adult life as something that looks like a small lizard. It is one of the most reliable life cycles in the animal kingdom. The axolotl, alone among salamanders in its part of the world, simply stops the process partway. It keeps its feathery external gills. It stays in the water. It never crawls onto land. And then, while still wearing what is functionally a juvenile body, it reaches sexual maturity and starts producing baby axolotls. The technical word for this is Neoteny, and the axolotl is the textbook example. That choice, frozen in deep evolutionary time, may be the reason the rest of it works. A real-world salamander that goes through full metamorphosis loses a lot of its regenerative powers as part of the transition. The tail regrowing tricks that work in the larval phase mostly stop working once the animal restructures its body for land. The axolotl never reorganizes. The cellular machinery that, in other salamanders, gets shut down at metamorphosis stays online in the axolotl for its entire adult life. The animal is, in a very real sense, walking around in the body of an eternal teenager with all the regenerative tools that teenagers have access to and adults do not. Cut off an axolotl's leg and you can watch the process play out over a couple of months. The wound closes within hours. A flat sheet of skin pulls over the stump. Underneath that sheet, a strange blob of unspecialized cells begins to pile up. Biologists call it a blastema. It is, in essence, a small construction site at the end of the limb, full of cells that have rolled back their identity. A muscle cell near the wound stops being a muscle cell. A skin cell stops being a skin cell. They become something more like a stem cell again, ready to be told what to build next. Then the blastema starts taking instructions. It rebuilds bone, muscle, nerve, cartilage, blood vessels, and skin in the right places, in the right order, with the joints lined up and the toes pointing the correct way. By the end of the process, the leg is back. Not a scar, not a stump. A leg. This is not a one-time trick. According to a review in the open-access biomedical literature, axolotls can lose the same limb repeatedly across their lifetime and regrow it each time without significant loss of fidelity. Their tissue does not seem to learn impatience. The 10th regrowth comes out about as cleanly as the first. The limbs are the famous case. The brain is the one that quietly broke the field. Researchers reported as far back as the 1960s that adult axolotls could regenerate parts of their brain after large sections were physically removed. According to coverage by The Conversation, more recent work has confirmed and extended this, showing that the animal restores every major cell type in the affected region of the brain, including the neurons themselves. In a mammal, even a tiny brain injury usually leaves scar tissue and missing function. The axolotl does it differently. There is no glial scar. The vacant area gets refilled with the same kinds of cells that were there before, hooked up in roughly the same way. Behavior tests on regenerated animals have struggled to find the missing pieces. Heart muscle, normally one of the most stubborn tissues in any vertebrate, comes back too. Sections of spinal cord, the kind of injury that locks a human in place for life, the axolotl repairs without much obvious effort. According to the MDI Biological Laboratory, the spinal cord regrowth includes the formation of new functional nerve connections, not just a bridge of placeholder tissue. The first big clue arrived in 2018, when an international team led by Sergei Nowoshilo published the first full assembly of the axolotl genome in the journal Nature. The headline was not what genes were in there. The headline was the size. The axolotl genome came in at roughly 32 billion base pairs, which is about 10 times the size of the human genome. According to the press release from the Max Planck Institute of Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics, it was the largest animal genome ever fully assembled at that point. Most of that extra DNA is not extra genes. It is repetitive sequence and long stretches between coding regions, the kind of genetic real estate that does not directly code for a protein, but can carry regulatory instructions. What the assembly let researchers do for the first time was actually find the relevant axolotl regeneration genes inside that giant haystack, line them up against the genes of less impressive salamanders and against our own genes, and start asking what was different. Some of the most interesting answers involve genes that exist in our genome too, but are switched off or used differently. The axolotl is not necessarily running on alien parts. In a lot of cases, it is running on the same parts, kept turned on past the point where the rest of the vertebrate world shuts them down. If you are enjoying this little salamander as much as I am, hit subscribe. More stories like this on the channel every week. The regeneration story does not stop at the genome. According to a peer-reviewed review on PubMed Central, the cellular details of how the Blastema works are still being unraveled. One of the more important pieces is a kind of cellular reprogramming that the axolotl performs at the wound site, sometimes called dedifferentiation. A specialized cell, instead of dying or staying specialized, walks itself back a few steps in development, becomes more flexible, and then participates in the rebuild. Other vertebrates can do small versions of this in small windows. The axolotl does it on demand, at scale, in adult animals for the duration of its life. The immune system seems to be part of the trick as well. Mammals respond to injury with an aggressive inflammatory cascade that, useful as it is for killing invaders, also tends to scar the tissue closed before anything intricate can be rebuilt. The axolotl's response is more measured. Inflammation comes in, does its work, and then steps aside in a way that leaves room for the blastema to organize. Researchers studying limb regrowth have argued that this calmer immune environment is one of the key reasons the axolotl can build a complexus limb where a mouse can only build a scar. There is one more strange feature worth pulling out. The axolotl, despite all this regenerative talent, does not seem to suffer the cancer rate you might expect from an animal that keeps dedifferentiating its cells. Most theories of cancer treat tissue that loses its differentiated identity and starts proliferating as a danger sign. The axolotl rolls cells back into a less specialized state on a regular basis, and a flexible early-stage cell is in some sense closer to a tumor cell than a fully committed adult cell is. And yet the animal does not seem to pay the standard price for that. Whatever signal tells those cells where to stop and what to become is doing real work in keeping the blastema from going off the rails. Cancer biologists have been studying that signal for a reason. All of this matters because of the second half of the story. The axolotl that exists in laboratories around the world, the pale pink animal in fish tanks at universities from Vienna to Boston, is a captive population. The wild axolotl, the one that produced all of this in the first place, is critically endangered. It lives, or used to live, in a single lake system south of Mexico City called Xochimilco, in the network of canals and shallow waters left over from the Aztec era. The canals were once a refuge. Now they are heavily polluted, full of invasive fish that prey on axolotl larvae, and surrounded by one of the largest urban areas in the Western Hemisphere. Surveys in the last decade have struggled to find more than a handful of wild animals per square kilometer of canal. Some recent counts have come in much lower than that. The strange situation is that the animal humanity might genuinely learn how to regrow human nerves from is, in its native range, on the edge of disappearing. Captive populations are not exactly the same as the wild one. The wild Xochimilco axolotls carry genetic variation that the lab strains, often inbred for decades, have lost. If the wild population goes, the genetic library that produced all of this regenerative biology gets thinner, pulling the threads back together. The axolotl is a salamander that never grew up. Because it never grew up, the regenerative tools that other salamanders abandon in metamorphosis stayed switched on into adulthood. Because they stayed switched on, the animal can rebuild limbs, jaws, heart muscle, sections of spinal cord, and pieces of brain with a kind of fidelity that mammals lose somewhere in the embryo. Its genome is 10 times the size of ours, which gave researchers a giant search problem, and is now slowly starting to give back answers. Its immune system runs cooler around injuries. Its cells can roll back their identity without spiraling into tumors. Its native lake is struggling, and the captive populations are doing the scientific heavy lifting. The honest answer to whether we can steal the trick is, not yet, but more than people thought a decade ago. Labs working on mammalian wound healing have started to ask why our blastema does not form, and to nudge cells toward that early flexible state in controlled experiments. Some of the genes that the axolotl uses are already being tested as targets for spinal cord repair and for heart muscle recovery after attacks. None of this is around the corner. But the existence of an animal that can do routinely what every cardiac surgeon and every spinal cord clinic in the world wishes their patients could do is by itself evidence that the trick is possible. Something in the long history of vertebrates worked out how to regrow a leg. Our branch of the family forgot or stopped paying the cost. The salamander in the polluted canal remembered. If you found this fun, there are more stories like this on the channel. See you in the next video.